is really not relevant at all. Well, yeah.
Really? It's just can you explain that a little bit? What do you mean? I'm not sure what you mean.
The concept and the attitudes about time are much more elastic. And plans here, I've learned, are a sketch. And the island has taught me a lot about patience and humility. And I've learned that if I try to push here, I get pushed back. And so it's been a 22-year lesson in patience and humility, and having a less expectations and hence resentments around people not being on time. And it's also, the more I'm in that, the better it feels to me. It's like, it's a very good practice.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
I get it. You explained it well.
Thank you.
It sounds like a good break from the rigidity of our own mind and thoughts and concepts and boundaries.
Very much so.
Which we're kind of trained in. I mean, I think they're innate, but also depending on the culture where you live up, where you live. But for most of us in the US, the upbringing, is a little bit more rigid than it sounds like it is in Mexico.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's not that people here aren't responsible and don't work hard or any of that. They do. But it's just a different. There's like 3 words for now. One is al rato, which means at some time in the future, fairly soon. Ahorita, which is like a little more close to now, and ahora, which is now. Then that's kind of an example in terms of language about what I'm talking about. So.
And when we say, I want it now, we want it now.
Yeah,
right
now. We're not saying al ratito or al rato, or it's ahora.
It's right. We don't have those other 2 possibilities in our mind. What do you mean, not right now?
So you learn what each one means and
interesting
how to adjust your expectations accordingly. And it's really quite lovely. So, hello, everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No,
Geshe-la knows. He's been to Mexico.
Yeah, Mexican, but some name is same, but place is different. You went there. I never been that area.
No, not to Cozumel, but
yeah,
other areas, right?
Now we start, okay?
Yep.
Sangye chedan soki chonam la chanchu pardo dani kyapsunche Sage jinso gebe chonam ki dola penjere sangye ndo parash Sangye chedan soki chonam la chanchu pardo dani kyapsunche Sage jinso gebe chonam ki dola penjere sangye ndo parash Sangye chedan soki chonam la chanchu pardo dani kyapsunche Sage jinso gebe chonam ki dola penjere sangye ndo parasho Sangye chedan soki chonam la chanchu pardo dani kyapsunche Sage jinso gebe chonam ki dola penjere sangye ndo parasho Simchen tamche dewa Dewe gyudang dambara gyuchi, simchen tamche lungan gi gyudang tawara gyuchi, simchen tam lungan mebe dewa tam min tawara gyuchi, simchen tam nyerin chadang nidang tawe tang nyamla nebara gyuchi, simchen tamche dewa tam dewe gyudang dambara gyuchi, simchen tam 동안당 동안 기교당 다와라 규지 순전 담제 동안 배워당 미도 순전 담제 니린 차단이당 다외당 냠나 내가 규지 순전 담제 대화당 대위 규당 덤버라 순전 담제 동안당 동안 기교당 다와라 규지 순전 동안 매배 대화당 민다와 규지 순전 니린 차단이당 다 Tanyamlane Parakyuji Sajbyoji Chuji Medotum Riruniji Nyendeyambadi Sanje Jindu Midembuayi Dugunanda Jinlai Chubarajo Idam Guru Ranamendala Kaniyatayami.
Until enlightenment, I go for refuge to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the accumulation of the practices of giving and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. Until enlightenment, I go for refuge to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the accumulation of the practices of giving and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. Until enlightenment, I go for refuge to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the accumulation of the practices of giving and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. May all sentient beings be endowed with happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings never be separated from joyful bliss. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free of bias, attachment, and anger. May all sentient beings be endowed with happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings never be separated from joyful bliss. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free of bias, attachment, and anger. May all sentient beings be endowed with happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings never be separated from joyful bliss. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free of bias, attachment, and anger. This ground spread with incense, adorned with strewn flowers, Mount Meru, the four continents, and the sun and the moon, I imagined as a Buddha land, and by offering it to you, may all living beings enjoy this pure land. Thus, meeting the teaching of the peerless teacher is due to the spiritual mentor's kindness. I dedicate this virtue for all living beings to be cared for by excellent spiritual friends. Yiram Guru Ratna Mandala Kam Niryata Yami.
Kange tujengi zongwa tawa tamse pambe chere tambe chini tamse pe kodam te la cha cha lo. Ya da. Matsu. Karsware. Tiring. Te matsu ruru che de ta che nyeshe che de. Junju gui jung cha go ngoni chena. Ta matsu le tangpo yin zan. Jumda ji gui rotan de shira. Kuma nyung teni indikala tos kabu cha go ware. Tende indikala. Ta kesan senzambe korde. Kansam jishure ta. Tiring senzambe korla yang kiransu. Diwa yinna, diwa tangye de peke chimbore. Ani zozo simla kati na rowa, popa, yumba meba chichegwa de pe misibu ke chimbu chadi yore. Jumbayana te Kabala leo Martini pe Tonta Chen to be a mare. Gumbuludu Jumbe Pumpal Mitarzade. Tap Jum de some Jum de na. Tap Pumale told to Marilla, Dumala told to Marilla Gore. Karzana Dumala Toala, Susu Kalegap. Then the two Yovade, Soso Tongina, Kalegana Gavin Chojum Warwa. Some Jumba Unileptic Yomar, Kaduina. Netup Nenjungri said the Papa the Wimpo Nepar the War. The Miss Catchamore. Papa, you're not Tonta Yons over to war. Was a sign you come on to the Corona Chajajela Popache Matuna, any pecora. Mune Sangi come on to be a Mazugula, a semi ranging the Earth Chadiore. Tanda was on your money. Yo Marizella go Mariore, Lubru Sugi, Digore, telling us to cut the chago war. Deep missive catchambore. Papa the missive catchambore. Catu in a popa, similar popa to Tonang water, missive catchambore. Popa the Tonang, Chanju is some thought, Yamanchel tell la yo mare. Chanjuna dero. Tele, young Kusera. Chanchu simkil tajani, then they were Roala, Simshi sui gilu curuzes muda Zabeliuniore. Tewe Kyongin Kusawa, Kyoa the Sam Jumbalatini, Kyoa the Ligor, and Jungumare, Netu Mares, the Kyoa Silela, that Chanjuki Sim Layo Mare, Chanjuki Sim Gil Talapejane, that the Chanjuki Sim Yamlenjane, Yan Royana. Thank you, come over to Rotuara. What at the package Mudua? Chanju Simki Tewe Kyung Kusura, Chanju Simki Tajuni, then they were Roala, Simshi Zedua, Samlu in the game. Pe Muni Peju Yabutanshing, Lepate, me, Chazanji Peju Tange, Samutang Tuganjila. Then it Simshi Sui Gilugur, Sushi Gilugur, Gilug Maris Zungora. Gilu Zidigalang and Jungu Marang to go mare, Nibu Maras the Kajashia, Gilu Bicajara. Titela, Netu Nenjungri thing, chickens at the Popa the Guare. Popa the Tawani, Pemis Catchmore.
And so we've been speaking about the the main philosophical systems or schools of thought when it comes to Buddhism. And actually, this can be rather complicated, and so therefore, for those beginners, for those that are just entering the study of the path who've not really heard about these before or studied them before, actually this can be quite involved. It, can be quite difficult. But what's really of utmost importance is that one remains inspired and remains confident that one can understand this. Because the flip side of that is to feel defeated or like there's no hope in being able to learn it. And it's very, very important that we never fall into a very hopeless, defeated kind of mindset. For whenever we're feeling like that, whatever it is that we're looking to do, we can't accomplish, whatever activities. We can't accomplish them when we're feeling like this, when we're feeling defeated and dispirited. And that's why there is the quote that says that when one has the spirit of hopelessness and defeat, then there's no way to be liberated. And so that's because in order to be liberated, to gain liberation, what this is to be rid of suffering, to be free of suffering. And to be rid of suffering takes work, it takes effort. It takes diligence. And so therefore, this attitude of defeat and hopelessness is counterproductive to our being able to rid ourselves from suffering, or never mind to be liberated. So therefore, it's very, very important that we don't feel hopeless and discouraged, but rather we feel inspired with an attitude of, I can do this, I will do this. Because if you have hope, then you are able to accomplish your aims. And so in regard to the accomplishment of becoming enlightened, or to gaining the state of Buddhahood, if one doesn't hold hope within one's mind of doing it, how would one ever think to accomplish Buddhahood? So it's said that this nature of this enlightened nature is a nature of this mind beyond all affliction, beyond all suffering, that the mind's nature is radiant and free of afflictions. So it's not that we don't have afflictions, that they don't appear or arise in the mind. They do, but they are not the mind themselves. These are temporary defilements, temporary arisings. The enlightened mind's nature is clear light, it's luminous. And so it's very important that we that we continue to have inspired interest and hope, and then have practiced bodhicitta with this inspired interest and hope. Because actually there's nothing other, there's nothing greater, there's nothing beyond and more important than the practice of bodhicitta. And that's why there is the quote in the here in the Way of the Bodhisattva, in the chapter on patience and tolerance, that says, what intelligent person would not mount the steed of bodhicitta that brings one quickly from the state of happiness to happiness, life after life? Who would be discouraged to ride that horse of bodhicitta? What intelligent one? And so, here it says would be discouraged. What intelligent one would be discouraged to mount that horse of bodhicitta? And that's just the mind that we're speaking of. This dispirited, hopeless kind of attitude that thinks I can't do anything. And even would say, even though bodhicitta is the one thing that will help me quickly traverse and bring me from life after life, happiness to happy state to happy state, one would be dispirited thinking, oh, I can't do it. I can't mount that horse of bodhicitta. I can't, I won't do it. That's why it's very, very important that we work against this kind of dispirited attitude, because it's really bodhicitta, altruism, the altruistic mind of bodhicitta, that is what achieves enlightenment. That is what brings one to achieve Buddhahood. And this is a very, very important point. And so that what intelligent one has the thought that I am too discouraged, it says in that quote. And so here it says, thinks, in a discouraging way. What intelligent one thinks. And so there is a mindset, and it is with this human intelligence that we have will and we have choices and we can make intelligent decisions. And here in this quote, it speaks of the mindset of self-deprecation and discouragement, thinking I can't do it, I won't do it, I won't mount this horse of bodhicitta, I won't practice bodhicitta. And this is the very mind that is unwilling to take the very transport that will get one where it wants to go, because it is feeling too discouraged and self-deprecating. So we must actually really urge ourselves on to kind of the flip side of that, which is thinking, I can do it. I am able to do it. I will do it. And so there are two aspects of this mental attitude that are very, very important. And one of them is a confidence, and the other is a devoted interest. And so taking these two together, great self-confidence and devoted interest are very important points.
단다 중대 데리샤 준디 류리샤 서파레미도 준디 류나네 숄로카 니슈 세르구 바데.
And so actually
숄로카 테나 렐라 요로와 네 카투 좀 샤겨데 숄로카 라비아메나 토스도 네탄다 페잘타인데 숄로카 니슈 세르구 준디 류리샤.
Okay, so Geshe-la has, and excuse me for a minute, I need to turn up my volume. And I have to escape a screen to do that because I'm not hearing so well.
준디류.
Really? Okay. Disabled Geshe-la nge lokle nangla ani kangel chikyu tanda.
알라.
So maybe I can do it on my headphones. I hope I don't disconnect from all of you. Oh, no. Okay. Okay. So Geshe-la actually looked that precise quote up, and it is in not in Patience. It is on, I think in this, it's called Heroic Perseverance. Sundru, yeah, Heroic Perseverance or Diligence, which is, I think, chapter 7. And it's verse number 29 in Geshe-la's book. Let me see. And here it's verse number 30. For mounted on the horse of Bodhichitta that puts to flight all mournful weariness, who could ever be dejected riding such a steed from joy to joy? And so they leave out, actually, it is in the Tibetan, which intelligent person, which, person in their right mind, so to speak. That isn't really reflected here, but it says, for mounted on the horse of Bodhichitta that puts to flight all mournful weariness, who could ever be dejected riding such a steed from joy to joy? So Geshe-la said it's hard to really, he remembers the quotes, but it's hard to remember exactly the number and the place. And so he looked it up for us. So if you're interested in noting that, verse number 30 or maybe 29 in chapter 7.
다 되게 가르친 거래. 저 세미탕니 직 뽑아당 좋아당 된디지 중이나 다 셈기 대화때 대회는 털두도 자대야. 뇌는 숭도 셈기반에 대화라 셈기반에 대화되는 숭도 셈기반에 대화라 셈기반에 대화되는 셈기 우주나 다 lui 가서 갈래니 갈래 갭투부도 셈나마 기버잖아 lui 갈래 갭투구미도 투사다 셈 두고 왔다데 뭐네 가서 대두기 서로 엄마한테 셈을 당니 째야 돼 디인디가라 낭배 다 셈좀마 왔어 셈라 종다르 땡에다 낭배나네 다 날렌티 케바티기 날렌티 중 당연지 마도 다 카버는 잠불이나 인디페 미시바 마란소 가와상 보러 수수셈들 애니 녀모 쳐서 까뒤는 도로 마주지 까뒤나 그게 초라 카탕야 데나니 젠 찌번지야 젠라 베 펜마토는 내 마kel 시에데 낭베 랍자 땅보들이 펜마토는 내게 기요 말레스 숭도 제자 답하게 낭베 쳔니 쪼비 차니 제바이나 닌중기 짐바다 빨리 그중라 젤네 마켈 세야데 랍자타 쪼비천에 랍자 쪼바 탐제 두나 네바 마켈 세야데 용고아레 다 산스크리트 그중기 오 젤네 펜타고레 세데 쪼비천이다 랍자트리 간젤 펜 네마켈 세야데당 펜타 펜바테 쏘데 펜바타고레 세야데 제자 장 짓 지디가라 셈시거라 부디시디가라 에 닝보암 야니 젠라 펜바타네 데니기 젠라니 베 펜바타긴 셈데시 거와 펜셈 펜미시버 개침버 당가서 베 장주기 셈데 디중이나 랑기바 젠기바 아니 베 신디요바 신디라 떤다투바 치말라 떤다투바 유셈 깡가 대와 요인데게 기른도 아니 군을라마레 뭐지 란 가르사 둥알 전한 장주기 셈 공부하레스 둥알 주디 장주기 셈 고메이나 둥알 중 깔로 장주기 셈 고메이나 애니베 셈나 줌발리그 마레스 프로알레그레스 애니 기부주나 장주기 셈 공부하레스 기부주니 가서 베 레탕보아데스 기부주니 갈라 셈페 파메드치네 애니베 시부지 간주먼주 제샤고래 디디 장주기 셈고나 양 바기 밤에도 돔제니 또서 셈 줌발레니야 따다 거위철라 카탕 투용 거래 어떻게 디나지 그상 너서 희나 내가 서승고 반대는 남가 강월쇼 누나 군지 누갈고 누갈게서 겜버쇼 시야데서 배치야보도와 대가서 윤도 섬당고래 윤동아 좀 냠는 저와 때 두고 거래 저비찬이다 미스비 깨져버려.
And so we speak about this horse that of Bodhichitta, this that brings us from this Bodhichitta that enables us to traverse lifetime after lifetime from joy to joy, happiness to happiness. And actually, when we have deep in our minds, sincere and deep devoted interest and inspired confidence, working on our spiritual path, then we can work in a way that actually we have peace of mind. We're inspired, we're interested, we have hope. And this is really a state of mind that brings one quite a bit of peace. And as it is said, as the Buddha said, as it said in the sutras, that happiness, we experience happiness at a mental level. And this happiness comes from the mind, is established by the mind at the level of, at the mental level. And so we can know that actually when we are not feeling inspired and confident really interested in something, the work that we try to do is very, very hard. What we're doing isn't pleasant. It's not easy to accomplish. It's just difficult. It's painful to get through something. This all really comes down to the state of our mind while we're experiencing something, while we're doing something or experiencing something. How is it that we're approaching it in our mind? And so in the Buddhist tradition, especially in the Nalanda tradition, there's really a focus on the understanding and instructions that show us that our own happiness and experiences, it really all comes down to what's happening internally, not externally, but what is happening in our own mind. And so this Nalanda tradition is really seeped in that understanding. So we should count ourselves very, very lucky as those who study and practice in this tradition, because it's really focused on showing one that one should look inside their own mind and see how much pain and difficulty their own negative emotions are causing. And also shows the path to the positive mind states, to the positive and constructive emotions and the virtuous activities, and turning one towards those. So we should really count ourselves very, very lucky. And in addition, we then look at the tradition. So there is this saying, this quote within Buddhism that says that if you aren't able to be of benefit and help others, at least don't hurt them, cause no harm. And so so this is a very, very foundational point within Buddhism. And we have both the Pali tradition and the Sanskrit tradition. So we have like the lower schools, the Hinayana and Mahayana schools. And within the Pali tradition, the part of that quote that they focus on, actually in their tradition, they focus very much on do no harm to others, harm no other being. And they really focus on that. All of the teachings actually come down to do no harm to others. And in the Sanskrit tradition, that's taken a step further, where in the Sanskrit tradition, the focus is on to benefit others, to do good in this world. Never mind, refrain from harming, but help others in this world, be of benefit to others. So actually bodhicitta, when we speak about that word bodhicitta, the altruistic attitude, so we have in Sanskrit, we have bodhi and chitta. And so the bodhi is the is like the good-heartedness, the altruistic, and the chit is mind. And so what this really means is the mind that wishes to benefit others. And so that's what bodhicitta actually literally translates to, is to train oneself to develop the mind that is always in the state of altruism, always wishing at every step to be of benefit to others. And so this is, again, like we saw in that earlier quote, this very mindset is what brings happiness to one. This is what brings happiness in the here and now, in this life, and then again also in the next life as well. So bodhicitta, very, very important. We had that earlier quote from Guntang Rinpoche, where Guntang Rinpoche said that when you are experiencing suffering and are unhappy, practice bodhicitta. And when everything is a delight and you are happy, practice bodhicitta. And this is because when we are unhappy, we have our own unhappiness can bring us to the oh, woe is me, and into very non-virtuous states and actions. And so we must remember bodhicitta, we must take our minds off of ourselves, think of others. And so when one is lamenting, lend a hand. And when one is happy, also remember bodhicitta. And this is because when all is good and everything's perfect and there's not a care in the world, then we really have, there's the danger that one can become very, very uncareful, unconscientious, and just throw care to the wind and begin to behave and conduct themselves in ways that are unvirtuous as well. And so in both cases, Guntang Rinpoche says to remember and to practice bodhicitta. It's very, very important that we don't fall into such blissful happiness that we forget what we're doing and are not careful. And so always remembering bodhicitta, both when happy and unhappy, really sets us and keeps us on the path of virtue and goodness and wholesomeness. And so then also, so I think there was one other quote. And then there's also the quote that was like an aspiration prayer that said that when I am happy and all is good and virtuous. May I dedicate that happiness to all others. And when I am sad and suffering, may this be, may my sadness and suffering, pain and suffering, dry up the ocean of pain for all beings. Was this aspiration prayer that we also had that again points out bodhicitta.
전주기 샘싱인데 샘라 좋아게 뽑아게 줌바멜레게 다 탑시 연애매너지르다 전주기 샘기
And so
단디 뒤서들랑 어서 내염 딘디 두바진질레데가라 샘라 뽑아다 좋아요에나 내염 두바진데 지르고 말다 또 개버려래.
And so bodhicitta, this altruistic mind focusing on others, actually, when we're inspired in this direction, when we have a devoted interest and a confidence, and really uplifted to practice bodhicitta, this is something that benefits us it's very important, and also especially right now, for example, at the time of this pandemic, when one is confident and inspired, uplifted, so the opposite side of dispirited and dejected, this uplifted and confident energy that we're holding within ourselves actually protects us. It does help protect us at a time with this virus around us. And so it's a form of protection that can benefit one, even at the, at the state of warding off sickness.
that 그래서 선삼백올라 좋아요베.
And so Geshe-la had mentioned earlier that we've begun speaking about the philosophical assertions of the mind-only school. We've spoken about those roughly a little bit. And Geshe-la's wondering, what are your questions? So it's important, he had mentioned earlier, to dispel any doubts or lingering questions. And so who has a question about mind only?
선삼을 타와데 셰고에데 뺏게 첨부르다 도데벨 타와레 선삼을 타와레 차레 그 선삼을 타와레 우마랑기벨 타와데 차룬두 와레 우마랑기벨 타와레다 그상아마 시겐 우마 튕기벨 타와데 차쇼 차고 와레 딜 타와 차라게 쳬버다 하고이나 데니 그상 여름 중도 탈와 지당도 이 탈와 지 펜다데 대 하고 그래 대마다 하고 말에 뺏가버려 네 갈갈때 파빈님장 문지기 타와 던던베 쇼미카베 탈와 지어래 딩이 갈래라 오면 주비치데 디 아니 탈와데 데서 바기 다인라 꾸르고에네 주고 갈래라 직 두데 지게기 바기 하고이나 탈와 펜다나 하고로와 또서 섬단능이 꾸르고에네 저망가 주대 돌래 양쪽까지 제쪽으로 talento sanzambe kolainda.
And so now with the mind-only school, so earlier we have discussed the Sautantrika and the Vaibhashika and Sautantrikas. And so now we reach the mind-only, and compared to the Sautantrika, this is even more refined understanding of a view of reality. So it's becoming even more refined. And it's very important to understand the points of what the mind-only school posit, what they are proponents of. And then as also within the middle way, there are two levels of middle way. And the we have the Yogacara middle way, and then the consequence school, which is the Prasangika. school. And so the Prasangika being the most refined and the Yogacara middle way being a little less, refined. So in order for us to understand, making our way up to understand what Prasangikas believe, it's important for us to kind of unpack those four logical absurdities. We talked about those a little bit last week, and the four logical absurdities, for example, are used when the Madhyamakans, the Prasangikas are saying, well, you say this, but if this were the case, and then they will apply one or maybe even all four of the logical absurdities. That's logically absurd because, and then there are 4 points. And they really use those logical absurdities to kind of splinter away that doesn't make sense to get down to what does make sense in bringing them up to their assertions, the Prasangika's assertions. So Geshe-la said, in the future, we will look closer at these 4 logical absurdities. They're important to know, and they're good tools to help us understand how Prasangika got to their view and how they negate the objections and assertions of the lower schools. He will send those to me, and I will get a translation. Actually, there was a translation that was on our screen last week that probably Doug has. I know I have here somewhere, Mark has. So it's already been translated. I don't need to translate it. But Geshe-la said that's for the future. Good and important to know, and we will study that. But for the here and now, Geshe-la wants to concentrate strictly on mind only. What do they assert? And so if there are any questions that you would like to ask about mind only.
I have a question. So it seems to me that the thing that we want to reject from mind only is that the reality that we're dealing with is entirely created in the mind. Like that's the thing that we're rejecting from mind only. But at the same time, there seems to be some validity in it, in as much as our feelings, our emotions, our interpretations of reality are so strong that a lot of times we might as well be making up reality because we're interpreting it so differently from the way it exists. And I just am asking if I'm right in thinking that, and if Geshe-la would speak to that.
Mm-hmm.
I guess we've talked about it before, I think, in terms of like emotional coloring or flavors. After we have an experience, like it brings a flavor along with it or a tone along with it that then colors everything that we experience.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes. Ani dire di samsampa ki trupsa de nangla pena konso ki derpa di pena di chirogi yul dang ngatsugi nyamyong sangma di lurgi lega di lurgi drup race ani songido yenayang di umatal gyorwe gi derpadi di pena di betsa ta dang longwa pena concert di samsampa di chatsang kare yenayang di lurgi drup yenayang di umatal gyorwe gi lula di dinangshin pena ta dang longi yomare kangin sana konsogi tani do drup drupyaki ani dogiore. Chechang di kebar chikre, di rebe di chik, di shandak yena yang, wone chena di William gi samlo. Wone chena ani pena ani pelcha di wone di nacho di nyamnyong sama di di samdang draware pena di dra chikla ani ngone di yagnyen yomare di nacho gi samdang drawwa yore nacho nyamnyong yena dra nangshin tagi yore nyamnyong mena pena di dropo nangshin tagi yore di yul la drupio mare di samnere di kola chik soroche di ngone lögi drup dra dang dang dropo
re lui kebare lagara ta kanji senjambe seala senjambe tudelula ngazo chirolni nangiorde chirol yo mardas 나제 율대당 진지 시바니 빠자질리 빼 이게 빠자질리 헤레스 라거레 치로니 켄데겐지 주기니요 마레스 치롤도 두두요 마레스 이게 빠자질리 켄나 셈기 류지시가 류 랑겨르마도 진빼 치롤니 나가나 진지요 마레라거레 로와 아니 탕교에 나나진지요 말했대 여대 여레스 나나진지요 말에 탕에점 민점 나점마다 요 말레스 다 선잠베 시바 다 조지기 시바데 덤버투반데 구어와
라
조지기 시바디 요와 시바 시바데 덤버투반데 구어와 선잠베 가르잖아 시제 탐제 누나 생이 숨도 누구라 선잠벨로라 제왕 용주 군다 숨나 최 탐제 누구로와
제왕 용주
군다
군다
대숨는 누구와래 되는 누니라
카레 디 낭웨기 요데 카레
최 간디지네 여자데 대숨나 만디베 최지 요마르다
삼양
제왕 차되었다 샘 제왕은 누구와래 제왕즈데 유긴 진기와라테는 주지투 게텐 두르바다 제왕스기 오라 자잔 샘데 제왕 차도 자잔 제왕이 두가라 렘버 두고라 제왕이 두 덴두라 산자벨로라 자잔 샘 렘버 두바 도구도 다 피지크스도 가르라고도 치롤니요 마레스 거기 맞아 제바제나나 줄코랑오는 짠는 라야요 마레스 이나베 가르사 로기 조지기 로티고 왕가마도 베 율코랑오는 라야요 마르즈 라고도 직바르도 여름지데 숨도 피지스 텐두고 아레스 가르사 된 데인두가나 땅오는 데 개침보래
라소
맞죠 개버데 차고도 다 선잠베 치룰도 마둠나양 조지기 시비 자 조바즘 시바단 제지임바 시비 낭차sam지마도 베 분바 가와세데 낭차sam지마도 다 치룰니 여바지 땐자와니는 켈링고 말해 아디 낭차sam데 조지기 시바데 렘버투바 켈린디갈라 또서 umma thangyuwa tatan demaso umma thangyuwa lembartuba dulsamyan kelingo marwa ten tsawani ni ina yosade thanyen ta ta tsamji tape shinda yela chosona shinda zri chagore yela soso talchana shinde thor mingde thordugo
라 디세 포추무서
shinda yela chona देखो पे शिंदा से देता पे गंगा डी ना शिंदी चावा दे चित बोरवा 데디 신다세데 다코 술루지도 비샤나 신디 자와체 두고 말고 신다 차고 말해 제상 간지 민 거기 자와체게 니바 연데 괜지라 민데 다 잠지마도 다 넘버 2가 준두고 말고 마탄주루라
Okay, di serpodo geshila, di serpodo, yana yang pena chokchikla, ani waling viti wadire. Ngone chena di logi lega, di samgi lega, ani di umatalgyorwegi lula ani pena samsampa ani kerangso di ani tata yomare di sangma sem yomare ani dogiyana
sui
samsam di uma talgyorwa ki samsampala
senzambala uma tanju senzambala tape 결혼 넘버 2에 디 제마테 탈와트즈나 레고레 넘버 2 소나 셈 조제기 시바데 넘버 2 바이나 타쿠 에 유문 두바지 차두고 그러와 넘버 2나
di logi lega gikola semgi lega gikolare pana di umatalgyorwa gi lugla ani William gi samlola dingone chena ani kare kado yanayang kare yanayang di lurgi legare ani ya di samgi legare ani pena di mapore di kapore kongyapore di ani yomenayang ngone menayang di lurgi legare di samgi legare
셈기 레가레데 uma tanju sem데 넘버 2반 누구 말와
hola so really
대다라와 넘버 그 탕에 점지마도 셈데양 탕에 점지 따 점지마도 요 말에 그래서 그산 탕에도 요 받을라 제주 숨요 탕에도 따빠 델라 던던 군섭 탕에 주기 셈메 미노바 델라 던던 주기 셈메 미노바데 제주 숨 창구와 이 셈은 달라 셈나 다가랑 창구로 uma tanju lula
re
hola so 대소 하고나데 강알려 말해
laso dene ani umatalgyorwegi lula ani sem bana sem lurgi drum nayam
lurgi
bana
두야데 마보데 탕에도 다가지고 탕에도 다 점점마도 진페 senzamen dovana jin semde number 2반 두고 말해
okay laso tarso potung
데려와 다들 지금 physics 기 능에 다 들진 theory 받아도 들텐데 유능원이 요 말했어 요 말에 observe 시기도 observe 거는 자 거랬어 observe도 왕시지마다 이시도 자식입니다
la
observe들 왕시
absorba
observe도 다
di
인지겔라
oh laso
진짜기 쉐바
oh laso yeah
진짜기 쉐바데 왕시지마다 이시 자식입니다 그 observe 뭐마도 이기 넘버 쉐바들어 두바 이시데 대자식어 말해 तदुंते सेंडी बारागे ओमरवा यार मुझे ते तरुंते राया लगारुं गोरगुर सुंगुतो
okay
ताते जो पे सेंजाम बेतावा द तुम्बु शिवन दुसु सुंगुतो दुर्जन सेंडी बादे पे मिसबा ते जजान ता मजो दुर्जन सेंडी बादर ये ते랑 सेंजाम बेतावा닌 디포 शिवन दुसे सुंगुतो That's Tangu Uma Tangu Tele Tachambara.
That's all. Okay, I will try to unpack all of this. So a couple of things to look at first. And the first thing is to remember that what the mind-only are saying is that there are no external objects that have any real reality, that have any reality. There are external, that this experience, what appears to us, actually isn't external. But our experience of that thing, that object, is something that's happening within the mind. So the perceiving mind and the object it perceives are one karmic ripening, one karmic seed within the mind. They are one thing that is all happening at a mental level. And the prasangikas say that so the mind only say there are no external objects. They don't exist externally. And prasangikas do not deny the object, but they say that that object is conventionally established. And so that's the very first important thing to look at. And then the within the mind only school, then also there are the three natures. So they say that things, including mind, fall in the categories of one of these three natures. And the first one is the inferential. So we have inferential nature, other dependent nature or interdependent nature, could also say interdependent nature, and a perfectly fulfilled nature, which is the ultimate nature. So things fall within these three. And even mind, so I asked Geshe-la if this included mind itself, and he said yes, actually within these three, then mind, according to mind only, falls within the other dependent nature or the interdependent nature. And so first, we set these two things apart. The main assertion of mind only. Things are not out there. It is all happening at a mental level. The prasangikas don't take it to a total refutation of that external object, but they speak about the conventional, that it's either parts or named or a causal, like an interdependent phenomena. And so when even so scientists, so what mind only believe is actually what quantum physics tells us. If you look for an object and really observe, take it under a process of deep observation, you are not going to find the object. And so modern science is parallel with that right now. And His Holiness speaks about this as well. And so there's a little bit of a different idea in terms of this experience and objective reality between mind only, and the prasangika, because the prasangikas say that actually, there's no inherent existence in the object, and there's no inherent existence in the subject or the mind that is perceiving. They say that there is no true intrinsic existence of that mind, whereas mind only does attribute some existence, substantial existence to the perceiver, to the mind, the mental, where this is happening. And so appearances, according to Prasangika, are, and there were these, so this conventional, that things, in order for something to be conventionally established, and we had those 3 points earlier, it is known to a conventional consciousness. No other conventional cognition within that convention contradicts it from thus being known. And reason that accurately analyzes reality, that is, analyzes whether something exists or not, does not contradict it. So according to Prasangika, things are conventions. They can be named, or they can be conventions due to being an assembly of parts, or something that comes into existence interdependent on other things. So if we look simply at the names and label, how we label something. So we have the classical example in the scriptures is they take a chariot, like a wooden, like a cart, like you have that cart that the horses draw. And when all of, so this chariot, when all of the pieces of the chariot are together, the wheels are there, although that wooden structure is there, the handles are there, everything's assembled, we call it a chariot. But when you take all of those pieces apart and lay them all on the ground and just disperse them, it's no longer called a chariot. And so the Prasangikas also say that objects are not established, but they're not established not for a very different reason. They're not truly established because they are conventions. And so that's a difference that's important to understand. And so I asked, so that's just setting apart the philosophies. And now what about this? Well, everything is mind only. Well, maybe also the Prasangikas don't really speak about this, but what about, as you had asked, William, all of this mental engagement? This is good, this is bad, this is red, he is good, and how our mind state colors the way we see something. And Geshe-la said, this is absolutely true, that this, that you're correct in saying that the mind is doing that. It is the mind engagement that is doing that work, not the I. And His Holiness the Dalai Lama also speaks about this. It is not, for example, vision itself that sees something as red or blue. It is, that happens within the mental consciousness, not within the I consciousness. So this is happening, and also seeing something as good or bad or an enemy or a friend is also something that happens at the level of mental consciousness, not a sense consciousness. And physics, Geshe-la mentioned also that quantum physics, where they are now, as far as they have gotten in their abilities to examine the material world, that physics and our reality, our world, physics fits in with like the highest end of what the mind only believe. Physics will also look for things at an atomic level and also look for the atom itself and cannot find it. And so therefore they fit in with the mind only. Prasangika is going to get even more refined than that. But Geshe-la is saying that yes, there is the mind engagement, that mental engagement, constant mental engagement in our experience. But Prasangikas say that ultimately the mind itself also is not something that is inherently findable and existent. Did that get to the nutshell of your question?
I think it's starting to.
Okay.
I think it's starting to.
Mhm.
You know, we're all working through it, I think, and there's a lot of new concepts here.
Mhm.
I just get the feeling that there's so much about what we perceive and about
Oh, you froze.
Ourselves, you know, not even necessarily being aware of it. Just a lot of things that are coming from the mind that we aren't entirely conscious of, and like meditation sort of makes those things a little more apparent.
And in Geshe-la's answer, he did mention that, we have the perceiving consciousness and the object, but it's not the eye or the ear, but it's really the experience does indeed happen at the level of mental, not faculty. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's so easy to fall into the habit of seeing things as they are, and not and losing that awareness of how much of it is being created mentally.
You mean things as they appear or things as they are?
Things as they appear, like how much of that is really just our own interpretation of it. And it's not a simple thing. It's not just to say, it's like, oh, well, we call it red and maybe it's orange. It's heavier than that, because it's like, it's at the level of every object that you experience all the time.
Dire ani Geshe-la ngazo di gomshi, ngazo di habit nangshin, ngazo di gomshi di nangwa tsu tutup ani nangwa nangshin kelengi ore. Yenayang ani pena ngatsula ani nangwa nangshin odere ani kelengi ore. Ngazo di gomshi dire. Ngazo di ngone ani dela kari ore. Di ngone ani ngone repe. Di ngone mapore. Mapo sena kari ore. Ngazo samlo tang nanshin. Ngone chena di neluk ani tongi yomare. Ngazo samlo nangshin tongi ore.
Ngazo nangsul dela uma tangyuri na nangsul dela denang de diorese dembe nawa. Denang de ngazo nangsul dela denang yores. Denang de shi gore la gore dembe nawa de shi gores.
Shikore.
Oh, te me towa ina de songi to gorba dembe nangsul de. Kanche telang gache denang le tiore la gore. Uma tangyuri dembe nawa de le tiores. Ngazo nangsul la. 세상 뭐에 니수데 니루 뭐마다 가서 떠고 말아 대난도 데요디 이파기 유르문에 코 수두도 바 말렘는 셀렘는 통이다 데서포테 마르포레스데 유르문이 요나 나와 나신지 다 레세데 냠냠전 로샤고라 지방은 뭐니 제나 나 나신지 매바다 라그와 Nilungwe mateda zembar me padre chadiorwa yulungwe me pa sududu matuba.
Okay, let's neluk denme
Nilu ngomate to chutu matuba yulngone meba nawana je matuba chadiorwa. Nangzul tardu matuba.
Awesome.
Teso kazang azo tangi jimetam jedina salbudoa. Chazan nangzul de la denang de yores, ngazo nangzul de shigores. Zinchele yores, specha mangben zinchele yores, zincha zedigala, denzin sigorwa, demran zimba. Specha mangben zinchele yores, sumudo, zinche.
Zinche, yeah.
What are the denang, so them nangzul de chadiore. Tigi lepa inata kuru yucha gore. Ti malepa jitoba inatini tarbi yucha gore.
So absolutely. What you're saying is very much not only our habit, but our experience. As it says in the texts that things appear as if they're true. That is the nature of appearances. Things appear as if in a true way. And that's what you need to shatter. So this habit that you like the way that you expressed it, William, that we just accept things the way they appear. In the scriptures, it says that is exactly what appearances do, and that's what we need to eliminate. That's what we need to get rid of. That is the way they appear. Not only is it our habit, that is the way they appear to us. And in order to destroy that, to dismantle that, one needs to see emptiness. When you see emptiness, you have destroyed that formerly, that the way it used to appear. It breaks that down. It shatters it. But things do appear to us in certain ways. And if they are appearing like that, red and round and whatever we're seeing, it means we're not seeing the actuality of that object. Like you said, there's so much interpretation from our side. What that points to is we're not seeing the actuality, the true abiding nature of that object. We're not seeing the actuality. The actuality doesn't appear because we haven't had a realization yet. We haven't realized the actuality yet. And so as long as things are appearing to us as red and round and tall and short and this or that, then things are in appearance mode. When you have a realization that brings you to actuality mode, to the true abiding nature mode, what has been eliminated and what is gone and missing and destroyed and dismantled is that old way when we saw things as this or that and true and real and solid and this and that. When we have that realization, we see the truth of that reality. And through that, we then shatter the appearance mode. And so the true appearance mode, the true reality mode, seeing the true reality mode shatters the appearance mode. And so, so here, the way things appear as this or that, or as like the classical texts call it, or the texts call it like true appearances, something to be truly this or that, is also sometimes phrased in the text as a true reality, or denzin, seeing clinging to a true reality in things. So actually those are synonymous, that like you said, the way we're interpreting it is a true reality. Clinging to a true reality, that's what needs to be shattered, or a trueness, or a this or thatness, that's what needs to be shattered. And so as long as we're seeing things in appearance mode, then we are bound to samsara. As soon as we shatter that and have realization, and are seeing at a level of what the true reality is beyond our interpretations or without our interpretations, the reality mode, then that is the seed to liberation.
I have a quick question.
Oops. Okay, go ahead.
When you describe seeing reality, is it a cognitive reality or is it energetic reality?
Is there like clairvoyance involved? You know what I'm saying? Like, is there something beyond, I don't know, what am I?
Beyond just understanding what
beyond
causes color, a silly example.
So is it outside of or beyond the thinking mind? Would that be part of the question?
Yes.
Yeah.
Intellectual thinking mind?
Yeah, if there is any energetically aspect.
Pena nato di tongni tok ani dagmegi tok tok pa de sana di samlo dang drelwa yore nato namgyun nangshin samlo tang nangshin repe di ngunshe dang drelwa yona di ngunshe tokpa di samlo pena logi di lo dang ani degi yona
동니 도용도가라 로와 맞주길 단다 맞주길라 내낭 슈춤보여와 내낭되기 동니 도야라 디브여와 동니 도발라 아니 삼노타 삼노땅기 찌기 애니페 내낭도 슈충루드가라 zember 메바데 나와도 슈치르고 와래 아니 다 솔람 jorlam khadla ta ti tongni toya de ta janju seba shindu wangbu nombu ina semake mangaron tongni togore
la jangchup sempe
wangbu nombu janju seba wangno ina semake bengaron ni tongni togore tongni tunji sultu togore musumdu to dhumara tunji sulgi tunji sedigala tunji nawada chene tape tangbun deji char tangbu kwa chene ngazu sombani zade dembre me baranjingi matu batende kwa gyamne deji kwa chaju ten deji dala samtangi tangi ne tunji nawale gore tedan raboji pe tongsang raboji semle char gore te kazo chuna denang de shu chung gore tat denang de kazo shu chuna tunji pagi tongi toba tongi la sanang legiore sanang chiru tatini komgi jolom chujo chumo pardu tunji nawa yore ta jolom chujo chumo pade nyambra ja yondu gala
kadu bartu ganda
jolom chujo chumo jolom la de zemo zopa chujo yore de zemo zopa chujo jolom la nasegi oda jolom chujo chumo pade tong te tat ku tongi tunji tu to diorwa tela tongi la ni nyambar ja don tela sanang thob yondala tap lamde thonlam chabare tongi musum to pare
la so tene ani ngonso tok du konsongi triwa de ngato samlo tang nanjin ki nyamnyong repe yama lodang drawa di lodang depe gi nyamnyong
ta tuba ishe den de dirwa tongi di ishe di cha dirwa 단단 아주 미기 니까때 미기 통고래 미기 통네 애니 이시디 니 까보 녀들 네번 된거 와 동영어마다 이시 차디래 두바 이시디
di pedi apo chumason di ani pena di gayung di kalpo.
가열 된 가서도 시드 미기 통고래 와 미기 통데 두바 이시랑이 두바 이시기 니 까보 녜신 된거래
Re.
녜신 된데 갈라 두바 이시디게 까비임바 또빠라다
Yun di samlo
samlo 대화를 두바 이시라 또 일로 또빠던 대화 차거라 와
laso.
सबे इलु तोपला सनंग लेyung gore जजांग अजु पे युजेन देने ये जगह जो दे युजेन samudang wa पे मिस के छमु छा गोरा
Okay, di surpodo yana noma pena ngaso di ngetri what I guess la ngaso di demani ani jangpe kapsu, right? Ani dene dondang dempa di lodang depare logi ani to yomare.
मारे तंतम देंबा से दुआ देंजे की लोले के प्रचार कुंसोब देंबा तंतम देबा ते निचु खागारे करजना तंतम देंबा से देंजे की लोदे yang tapa papi nyamja ishi tingole denginza tondam demba labre kunsup demba sigdala ngaranzu matabe ta lo nangzul mataba chaderwa lo kunsup bengola demba ninang jingi lodan ninang jingi luengola denginza kunsup demba labre kunsup siede ninang de kunsup chabare ti luengola denginza kunsup demba 파빙 냠자 이시데 로 양다바 인자 띵올레 된 인자 돈담 덴바자라 돈담바 로 양다바 론 돈담바
Okay, then culture di dinge nore culture di ani
디 렌제기 로레 케버 차바라 군섭 덴바다 돈담 덴바자야데 단다데 살랑 주먼준세데 시디가라 두파 이시들라와 두파 이시들라 로데 살월 토바 인자 무슨도 또봐 인자 동일라 산랑 중에
laso yana di thinking nangjin samlo
samlo 마다 또 말와 삼로 기고래
re yana yang de kapsu ngunsun ki to de kapsu di samlo tang ya ki lega yana
대다에 용 사주바 버도 삼로다 땅구로와
laso dene topa culture
다 냠자 병올라다 삼로 용고 말을 대 제토바 냠는 책인데 제토바 올라 용고라 삼로
disoboto di ngunsun ki tok ani
문송도 또가라 냠자 올라 잡아라 냠자 올라 쳐다 율당 춘이니 빼마 춘이 짱바마다 전다 균이 로라 삼로는 레고 말에
yeah culture di triwa dire di ngunsun ki tok pe kapsu
무슨도 또 배갈라 답에 나와 전다 찾아는 거를 춘이 동상 그런 직마다 깨게 처리고 말에
okay yeah di triwa di
zembe 동상마도 요 말에 대로 대응올라
laso yeah so when we speak about having a realization for example let's say realizing emptiness realizing like the underlying reality that something is not possesses no thisness or thatness, but what exactly it is or isn't, what the true reality of that is. Well, we have to understand that what obscures or veils us from seeing this having this realization of like the emptiness or lack of an intrinsic existence, a lack of intrinsic thisness or thatness of the way it appears. The reason we don't see it is we are we're obscured. And what obscures us is a fixation to those appearances being what they appear to be. And so in the beginning, one does need to use thinking process and conceptual thinking to rationalize what they have studied about emptiness or the lack of any true intrinsic nature in that thing. And one must first study and understand that and think, really think on it, really ponder all of those points, all that one has learned that undermines that clinging to reality in it. And as one does this thinking, again, conceptually thinking and processing, the fact that it is an untrue appearance, that it's false, that the way that it appears is actually is false and deceiving, that really grows, that becomes stronger. One begins to see through the illusion of that appearance. But there's definitely thinking going on. So we have either the 10 bhumis or the 5 paths. When we look at the 5 paths, and what these are levels of spiritual progress. When one is working on the spiritual path, one kind of traverses these paths. And so we have the path of accumulation and then the path of joining or preparation, which has 4 stages in that. And so when we're working on those stages and paths, and for someone who already has great bodhicitta and really sharp faculties. So for a bodhisattva, one who has already has really turned and progressed on the path in such a way that they are practicing and living in this world for the purpose of others entirely and have really sharp faculties, then so this realization they're getting closer to this realization where they first have this general, like generic idea of what emptiness is or what the true reality is. And it becomes clearer and clearer as the veils thin, the veils that obscure emptiness thin. Then they thin enough that in the mind, it's still at a conceptual level. There's still conceptual energy going on. There's a real clearer feeling and a real impression of what is to be realized is really unfolding. And the grips of fixation to trueness, through this or thatness, and what they're seeing becomes much more like a liquid and fluid. And it's really clinging to a true reality is beginning to really loosen. And then emptiness, the what is to be realized, is becoming clearer, and then it clearly appears. And so this is something that happens at the end of the 4th level. So there are different levels of this path of joining, which are the path of heat, the path of peak, and so forth. So when we get to the 4th, the end of the 4th, there's still conceptual level, and then there is a direct seeing. So before there was a generic idea and a much clearer, closer to the real thing, and then it's the real thing is seen at the path of seeing. So that would be the next path after this 4th level. And at that, up until that point, there is still conceptualization. There's still conceptualization until one meets with it directly and has an absolute direct experience. So the direct experience happens at such a deep level of meditation, where rather than even having any exchange between subject and object, dualistic appearances, like a twofold, a subject and object appearance, is over, and one is in the complete, is completely absorbed in samadhi and has an experience of what is called dharmata, which is the reality. and one is then absorbed in reality where there are no dualistic appearances, so therefore there is no conception, and there's no subject object relationship. But then after meditation, then there is again conceptualization happening. And so actually so this realization could not happen without a lot of cognition and conceptualization. And most of it is still, even if it becomes subtle, there is still conceptualizing and mental engagement until the point when one is completely absorbed in Dhammatta. And then it is beyond, it is without conception, because there is no subject object.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Can I ask a question, Diane?
Mm-hmm.
So, so once that's been accomplished, what's the mind like for that
Mm-hmm.
person in everyday life? I mean, once they get off the cushion and they're back out, you know, interacting.
Pena ani tonglam lepe kapsu ani ngonso di tong ani ngonso gi tokpe jela jetopla pena ngaso di churlam gi nyamnyong kandrere.
Oh, that's Cholamde. Ko Nyamja Kodula Chutam Jaraji Mebato Indugala. Any Jetopgala Nangla Raji Mepat. You must have now the Legiorta. Jetop, you must be now the Legore. Jetopgala. Oh, that Mazo Nanda, number when you money you Nangi, did the mass, did the Yomares the never nation didn't to go. Mazo Lonyan Tayena, Puggy TV Nalabe, Gartaba the Kanga Tungo, the TV Nalami, Meadanga Nation Dingiorwa. How Gugorwa? The Nangsam Jamada, Yoma Meade. What a tinajin Nangla Rajimepa, then don't you multiple now at the Jetuka Ginyan and the Terre. She tamjeta cousin attending Madame, some the Samlo the Kurgorta.
La.
Chitamje Tape, then don't you multiple Nangla Rajimepa. Never intend to war.
Oh, nyepa. Okay, yeah. And so what happens once someone has had a direct realization of the true reality, or of the one really sees through the illusion, sees emptiness, then so after one, for example, gets up off the cushion, when one is not in a direct experience of that, and one is then going about in their daily life, then it's like a dream-like experience. It's a dream-like experience in which one goes about one's activities with a full certainty that there is no true existence in what one is seeing. One recognizes that things are appearing like this, but there is a full certainty that things are not that. It's a dreamlike, it's kind of this surreal, it's like a dreamlike state that one is walking around in, seeing things as illusion-like. And in some ways it can be compared to the way we just have a natural understanding that what we see on a screen, like on a TV, if we're watching a TV show or a movie, we see that it's there, and we know that it's, even though it appears to be a person or a place, we know that it's not really that. We know that that's not what's there in front of us. We accept what we see at face value as something that's merely appearing, but we know behind it that it's not that. So we have a full certainty of that. So we walk around very much in full certainty of this as illusion-like. Did that answer your question, Laura?
냠자 남가도 비 동반이 라브레. 제도 유마도 비 동반이 라브레. 다 냠는데 제도 유마도 부 냠는 제데 데리.
Mhm. So we can compare, actually, they are like two meditative experiences in a way. When we're actually in meditation, when we're absorbed in meditation, the meditation is open and vast and like a vast open empty sky. And when we're in post meditation, then we are in a dreamlike, illusion-like, walking through life like an illusion-like state.
Can I ask a question about that? So walking through life in that dreamlike state are the things that you are still participating in directly due to karma then? I mean, is that the reason you keep acting in the world in some way?
Bana jetop la pena to ani toni tope jela di jetop la ani ngaso pena lega dramanda ani lega chegerpe dramanda de ani ngaso di ya korwa jekten ki lega di ani chaya di ngoma sakpe le gi kolore kare chene ngaso pena ani toni tonayang jikten ki tse nang jinre
지생겨 가래 나지?
mitse pena lega dang
대단 라고 말다. 대단 개버 첨보야래. 된 자원인 라고 말해. 가르잖아. 동이 또 용디갈라 동이 또 문숨도 또 디갈라 마리바 된 자원인의 매베 차차래. 레 살사 요 말데디. 동이 또 짐베 간살라 레 살사 균이 요 말해. 레 미게 레 살사 균이 요 말해. 게빌 레 마도 게빌 레라 데오 마도 둥알 뇨에 요 말와. 다 가르치니 통람니 거기 서주 탐에 20벌도 가르쳐 거래. 교왕 아마 지셔고 레 미게 왔다. 사둠바 버도 뇽몬 빈디바데 빵야래. 뇽몬 디바 링에 원도잖아. 사둠바 버도 뇽몬 디바 팡. 사 예파니 다 시제세발 버도 쪽이니 시지 디바 팡야 때리. 디 팡야를 저야래 마도 답에 취탐제 아주 물게 겹때 머리 비장왕도 누구 알아.
chitamche yanker
아주 물게 겹때 머리 비장왕도 누구 알아. 머리 비왕기 찍어 알아. 마시 비왕기. 송이 또 내배 간사기 머리바 वजवान तो रहे हमारे मरी पे तक चम सारे
really morangi triwa dire not so the jiktingi lega tadung jiktingi lega chegrapegi jimson ngaso ngume sakpe legi kolarabe
ओ ngame se ले देता ले ngamba तो पांया गला जंगुआरे ते मदो ले सरसा गुनी अमरदा
so it's indeed
तो रू गिजन सुंगार तो भागे थोनम थब योंदी गाला मरी पदम उसुं गालदा चेदे मरी पप्पे तक चुमगो रवा जामे जाजे तिनी जुंदे जाजे गेविल लेदा यो मारता जाजे पे तक जम सारे ता जामे केजी तंबु तिन थब गोरदा थोनम थब योंदी गाला
zame
केजी तंबु 자매 깨지 땅보 되기 토비하게 유대 가르치 거래 칭이 왕기 토고르마도 디 유서 서도 두비하게 요 말에 자매데
tingoma sakpegi le urbe ikolarabe konda yapo hakoma songe
다 돈놈 토비온데 갈라 사땅부 토고르와
really
자매 깨지 땅부 토고르와 자제 때게 윤가 찾기니 중데 녀모베 자바데 제베 윤가 찾래 자매 딘 톱거다 돈놈 톱 용도 갈라. 다 돈놈 톱이 톱산에 다레 서도 사야 요 말데 여왕하면 레 미게 왔다 장야당 아니 여왕권 건도 플레이하기 탑시 쓴 거와 맞다 때는데 그 말에 되게
And so, yes, it's for that exact reason, due to karma, the continuation of karma. So we have to understand is when there is a direct realization of emptiness, what is cut off, what is eliminated and destroyed is ignorance, to be in a state of not knowing. One is no longer in a state of not knowing the reality. So one has completely uprooted, destroyed, and cut the stream of ignorance, but one has not cut the karmic stream. And so when we reach the path of seeing, we have eliminated, so we have those two kinds of veils. And so we have eliminated the emotional veils. So once we no longer are under the sway of ignorance, we have eliminated negative emotions. We have eliminated an energy within our mind that veils us or that causes us to become afflicted and negative. So that's eliminated. However, we're still working, and so we work on that through the 7th. We continue to work on that. We continue to work up through the 7th path, and when we've reached the 8th path, so this is when we're talking about the 10 bhumis, and when we're in the 8th bhumi, from the 8th bhumi all the way until full enlightenment, then we have to work on the obscuration to wisdom. And so at this point, we are at the point where we are no longer in a state of not knowing, and therefore we will no longer be influenced and swayed in a dependent way, because we have seen emptiness. We are no longer swayed. Yet we still have the past karmas that we have committed. And so we still have those karmas that need to be purified. And so they, up until this point, we haven't completely eliminated, up to this point, we haven't eliminated all of our past karma. So we have reached the uncontaminated stage when we reach that first bhumi, path of seeing, where we've eliminated the contaminations of the contaminated state of negative emotions, but we still have to work on purifying our karmas. And so they still will, will stay.
So Diane, I've got a question real quick.
Okay, let me just make sure that has been answered. Can I make sure I
sorry.
answered Laura's? Hold that thought. So Laura, did that?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay.
I think I get it.
Okay. So maybe Mark, continue to hold your thought.
Yeah, no problem.
It's we're gonna have a break here.
Okay, well, this question is for you then. So during the break, I'll ask you.
Okay. Sounds good. Okay, we'll take a break, everyone here. Geshe-la is saying you're probably ready to stretch your legs. We'll come back in usually about 10 minutes. Take what you need, 5 or 10 minutes. Okay, I'll be back, Mark.
No problem. Geshe-la.
Oh,
다시 들래?
다시 들래?
Hey, nga mo kirang sakme kichi tampo soyinbe.
삼을까지 당보래.
Zame kichi tampo. first uncontaminated thought.
Yeah.
Okay.
Maybe.
Zamekichi example. Di jetoplare
냠자가 로.
nyamsha.
어.
Oh, nyamsha nyam.
냠자 저 사탕부터 봐. 돈은 무슨도 또 봐. 자매까지 땅부 뒤지래.
Duchi.
뒤냠 뒤지 봐.
Chipa. Ale.
Same time maybe.
Same time.
Yeah.
Duchi. It's kale kapore.
그래 갈 가버래.
Yeah, this kale kapore.
갈 가보면은 근데 갈래 잡고요 말대.
Lela pachena.
릴라버라요 말에.
Sama chegi.
가버래.
Yeah.
나디.
Lela poyena. Sama chegi yore.
그래.
Tapalagi.
고비.
Ngelo malana. Ngelo mala. Tapalagi.
알레.
Lela poyena. Sama chegi.
대창매 찌기래.
Yeah. Anyone, if it's
Yeah.
easy, everyone does it.
Yeah.
Hey, Mark, are you there?
Yeah.
Do you remember when you said your friend Al used to get really sleepy whenever you guys would talk about emptiness?
Yeah.
So what do you think is happening at the level of like the winds when that's going on?
I don't know, but you also probably don't remember how you would almost pass out whenever we would talk
Yeah.
about it.
Yeah.
And that changed after we did the Diamond Cutter Sutra.
I was still getting a little, like when we were talking about Prasangika just now, I was still getting a little groggy.
Yeah.
It's like if the subtle winds for an average person are flowing this way, does hearing about emptiness cause some movement? I don't know.
No idea. I want to actually. Oh, Gisela. Ngoma nge dropo Al. Al TV. Al. Al.
You have trouble out?
Dropo giming Al.
Upa.
Opa.
Upa.
Nge dropo la Tony Core Lapti.
Yeah.
Tony Nikuido. Every time.
Good. Every
time I try to talk to him about emptiness, Lapti, Kongi falls asleep.
That
every time. My best friend Wyatt, I said, come look at this. Come. We go inside his office. I said, hey Al, I want to ask you a question. So I start talking about emptiness, ask his opinion, and he does this. 2 minutes, totally sleeping. Every time. It's like magic.
Yeah.
Really funny. Yumadori.
And Mark,
What?
reason I bring that up, the first couple times that I had acupuncture, like the first 2 or 3 sessions, I was out. And then I was able to stay awake through it. And it's like, I've always wondered if, like, you know, the subtle nerve channels, I don't know. Like if something about hearing prasangika, something about hearing emptiness causes some type of wind movement. Or like when the doctors talk about lung, if that's in that same ballpark.
Yeah. I don't know. I saw Laura Resky a minute ago, but now she's not there.
Actually,
What?
I said, hi, Laura.
Hi, Mark. How are
I
you?
said, I saw Laura Resky, but then she's gone. Now she's back. I miss you.
Yeah, I miss you too. I miss
Oh,
there.
Indiana
If
and
you
being
like
at the
plates.
center and yeah.
my sister's not here.
I'm going to be around in September. My daughter's getting married, so I'll be there for a little bit.
I want to see you.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
That's great news.
It is.
Aw.
She's very happy and I'm very happy for her. And, you know, it's just, it's a
Aw,
happy thing. Yeah,
good. Oh, wow.
You're going to be a mama-in-law.
I am. And I like my new son-in-law. He's
Good.
a really good fellow. So,
Hmm. Well, and
So-
maybe by September, people will be
mhm.
also, you know, things will be opening up a little bit and in a little bit of a different situation. So that's good.
Hopefully everybody will have a chance to be vaccinated by then. So
Yeah.
we'll be in good shape.
That would be good.
Yeah.
They just opened it up to 40.
No, yeah.
So
And
do we know, is Namgyal scheduled now?
I don't know how that. I'm going to have to ask Doug about that because of his visa status. So, because his ID is not. I don't know. We'll just have that. That's a question I don't know yet. Doug will know.
Because I know they're letting undocumented people get it. I mean, I don't think visa would matter.
Yeah, but I don't know. You're asking again a question for which I have no answer, so I can't answer it.
Sorry.
Speaking of questions
Well,
that can
allow
be
me to
answered,
answer.
thank you, Doug.
Yeah, and he's just fine in terms of being able to get it. He simply didn't want to schedule it yet for personal reasons, and so as soon as he wants to, we're going to do it, which is going to be soon. So if there's any other questions, you have to ask him.
Thank you, Doug. So Diane, is it okay if I ask you this real quick?
Sure.
It's a translation question. I'm wondering, when Geshe-la mentioned the first undefiled moment, I didn't hear how the Sakme Kichitampo, how you chose to say that.
I think just at the first moment of that level, I don't know if I might have missed it.
I was wondering because after you left, I asked Geshe-la about that, when that is, and I can't put it into words as easily as you would. But he was talking about the moments after, during the Jeto.
Right, it's at the end of the fourth, right? Wasn't that at the end of the fourth? I don't know if Geshe-la is still there.
I think
but
that's what he said.
at the end of the fourth. So there's that very moment of the direct perception.
Yeah.
Which is at the very end of the fourth.
During the Nyamshak.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mhm. Yeah, Sakme Kechik Tangpo.
Zamme kechi tangpo, sa tangpo, 송영원 숨도 또봐 뛰냠래 뛰지.
Yeah. So there, it's the same thing. It's the same thing as when you actually enter the direct perception.
Okay.
It's the very same thing. It's either the moment of entering the path of the end, it's the end of the fourth, beginning of the fifth, and the beginning of the first all at once. It's all one thing.
I see. I see. So
And
if
so
I
it's
was thinking,
called, yeah, it's
I'm
called
sorry.
that first uncontaminated moment. That's
So
what
if
it's
I was-
called. But
if I was thinking of this in terms of those moments being like chains of dominoes, that first domino, there's one domino that ends up being like a like a threefold. One is finishing and the next one is beginning.
right.
It bounces over the other two.
Yeah. Who said that?
저번 정인지 자매까지 땅비 유가래어래서 저기다 까지 땅부터부터 유강을 되는 터버래서 유강을 되는 터버래서 나 윤디리를 문진 제야요 말다까지 간지 중이 원그 터버래라고 하래 렌테게 베야래 마다젠 유제디 자매까지 땅비 윤디리즈데 문진 제야요 말해.
Okay. Yeah. Not so di ngunla not so de korla Laura gitri wa chikne kirang
ore.
korla son unisong.
그래 되래 그 중이 원그 터버래서 자매까지 땅보대.
So Geshe-la is saying, there are people who have posed the query into, well, what is the cause? So just what you're getting to. So what, if you've got these, I don't think I have enough pens here but what causes one thing to, that chain reaction? What is the first cause into that chain reaction? And so there's kind of a debate about that, but what the answer is, what it comes down to is that, and we discussed it before, actually, I think it was to the answer to somebody's question, the cause, about a cause. And so it's dharma, it actually comes down to dharmata.
그사 리바지요 리바지 중이기 리바 자와집에 리바 태베 리바 다 중이 리바 되게 되래. 배나 추틀은 로에데 중이래 되어와. 디규 가르잖아 중이래마다 윤디래들라 비야요 말와. 추틀은 도와데 중이로 와. 내 사와데 중이로 와. 내 사위 유 가르잖아. 내 사위 유 부싱래잖아 리고 말와.
But isn't dharmata always there?
사와다라신 중이래 되어와.
So actually the question, that answer came to one of your earlier questions, Laura. I don't know if you remember it. You asked what was the cause of something.
Of clear light mind or awareness, I think.
And then we had these.
What was the cause of the first, break in that symmetry to cause karma, I
right,
guess,
right.
Yeah.
Yep. And so this is exactly the same, the same thing Geshe-la said, that it is the it's dharmata itself. It's not something before that precludes it, that precluded the direct perception of something. It's nothing that different from itself that precluded it. So for example, if you ask, what was the cause of the fire, right? The megigyu.
me yuda pushingrela me sawi yu garzelna sawi yuda chuni je gorgora ranjing sawa char mado sawi yundiri zella ya mar me yuda pushingrela ndigo warwa pushinda guest down ramida yungura me yuda sawi yuda garza chuni rela gore.
So you can, if you're talking about a fire, and you say, what is the root cause? What is the root cause of the fire? Then it's actually dharmata.
Right.
However, if you say what led up, what are the contributing factors to the fire, then you've got a spark, then you've got the kindling, and you've got the wood. And those are all contributing causes, but they are not the root causes of fire. The root cause of the fire is dharmata.
사위 그대 매 사위 그대
Mhm,
딴
that's-
일에서 라비아 요마로와
mhm. That's the-
문진다 요미도와 주툴로 유바데 중일에 봐도 디 유가르즈니 중일에 봐도 디 윤디레서 라야 요마로와 야네 그 투리 인상 유거를 라비아리 요마로
Chukare,
주툴든로와 주툴로 유그로와
Oh, I cannot see. Tongtukimendo.
아 주생도 툴로 유그라
Uh-huh.
몰라
Oh, lasso. Uh-huh.
주경계 답에 배 미신되는 자가단에 토가 유그로 마다 때마다 주 깰란 누구 말에 주툴든 누구로
Mm. Mm-hmm.
네가 알게요 말에
Pena de mar bapia de.
말은 봐봐 주만 봐봐야 돼 중이로 와
Really? Okay.
그 누스 투르디가 인사 때 밥거로 와 때로 와
Okay. I can't see Geshe-La's hand, so I'm not exactly sure what he's doing, but okay, good. Now I can see Geshe-La. I'm sorry, Konda. So and we can also talk about, what is the root cause of water streaming down, of a waterfall, of water, streaming down a surface. The root cause of that, again, is also dharmata. The other things are contributing to it. It sits on the land and it falls down something and it streams down. But, it's caused from dharmata. That's the root cause. There are contributing causes, but that's the root cause.
So
야, 다 전부요.
So now we can, so Mark, did that answer your question before we move on to other
Yeah,
questions?
actually very much so. Thank you. And it combined with Laura's really nicely.
Yeah, good. So that was the question to the domino thing. Those are contributing factors, but it's dharmata, that is the root cause. But that is a one-time, or that is a simultaneous realization. And so the last question that had asked about so actually the last couple of questions have been very connected. What is that energy behind the realization? What is realization? And then, it connects very well. And then Mark's question about that first, what's called technically the first uncontaminated moment. When does that occur? Well, it occurs at the very end. And so this is what's called realization. So when you're actually then absorbed in that experience of dharmata, a direct realization that is beyond dualistic appearances, is at the end of the fourth of the path of joining, or at what's the very beginning or meeting, the fifth path, the path of seeing, or what's called the first bhumi, one of the first levels of a bodhisattva. That is a simultaneous, spontaneous event that is spurred on. The root cause of that actual realization is dharmata itself. And so that kind of brought that all together. And Geshe-La was asking, do we have other questions?
So Diane, about this, and this is another question for Geshe-La then. It sounds like leading up to that moment that there is, you're going to have to pardon me because I don't know exactly how else to express this. So I'm going to do it kind of poetically and let you pilfer through it.
No problem.
Though imagine that there's a cable, okay? There's a cable. This cable is like the center of the cable, which is this clear wire, and it's kind of encased with ignorance, okay? It sounds like what Geshe-La is saying is that at the path of seeing, it's like you shed that plastic coating of ignorance, and then it it's going on now purely. In other words, that first moment where there's a coupling with ignorance, if that makes sense, that it sounds like in what he's saying is that coming out of that moment is the final shedding of that sheath.
Well, I will pose that to him. And I think, I'm not sure if you were on earlier when Geshe-la explained it, but Geshe-la explained it in 2 questions ago, where he explained it like this. So I don't know if you heard this part. So the question was, what happens when we have a realization? Is it a conceptual thing? Is it an energetic thing? Is it what's called clairvoyance? What's happening? And what Geshe-la mentioned, and so this is very similar to your cable and your encasement example, illustration, is that things that we just take things to be this or that the way they appear, and we don't see the reality in things, is called clinging, or like having like being stuck in appearance mode. We take things to be just what they appear to be. Or said in another way, we cling to a true existence in that which we see. This is a veil. So rather than a casing, it's a veil.
Perfect. Then you don't need to ask Geshe-la the question. Sorry.
And when we think and think and think and analyze and analyze and analyze, we eventually get to a point where we're thinning that veil. First through conceptually thinking about the teachings and trainings on how things, and examining that things aren't what they first appear to be. They aren't this or that at all. We just fix on them or accept them, merely accept them. And that veil breaks away the more we study. And we're working on this at the point of path of accumulation and the path of joining. Very high level bodhisattvas then began to get glimpses, the mental impressions of the emptiness of things. That veil is continuing to thin and thin. That generic impression that we have of the truth or the emptiness or lack of intrinsic this or thatness of something begins to loosen. The idea of what the emptiness or the reality of something is is getting clearer. And then we reach that the end of the 4th level of the Jorlam, of the path of joining. And our consciousness, our wisdom consciousness, then becomes clearer. And so the veils are eliminating. And that's and that's what happens, is the veils thin and thin.
Now, okay, then this question is for you, and I think other people might benefit greatly from this. You just translated Jorlam as path of joining, and usually it's called path of preparation. Could you talk about what it is that's being joined, hence why the Tibetans would say Jorlam?
And earlier when I said it, I said both, because it is known as both, path
Right.
of preparation or path of joining. But the word itself is joining, is jor, it's union, the path of joining something, the path of union with something. So the jorlam, ani di tsikti jorlam, ani jorlam, sometimes jikela di joining. Pena di ni chikpo cha ani jor. Sometimes young preparation, trarakchaya, path of preparation.
인규
Kari ani yakshare.
다 동이 또 빨라 저리제 소리지라 동이 무슨도 또 빨라 저리제 소리지래 인규란다 저와 저웰람
Diagare, trarakchaya.
레레 테레 인규 다 가르잖아 절람 트시기도 다 트시도가 메타나 메 마투응을 사와도 맹 트때 갈때 응을 레기와 메 마투를 메 마라 다른 분이 트 레기와 동이기 답에 트즈레 인자 민들라 절람 충들라 트라브레 에니 제모 zpa checho zerde duschen songi tope rimba songi tunji so toye ge rimba chirede ta songi tunji so toye tote musum to toye la ta dadi de masana musum to toye ge dadi chagoro tere inju.
And so Geshe-la says that actually between the two, joining or preparation, that the path of preparation is better to say preparation, because actually what we are doing is we are preparing to have an experience or a direct experience of emptiness. And so it's very appropriate to call it the path of preparation. And so when we have the four, so very appropriate to call it the path of preparation, Geshe-la says is better. And again, within the path of preparation, there are the four levels. There's heat and what's called peak and what's called patience or forbearance, and then what's called the supreme dharma. And so and then we have the experience of emptiness. So as we are moving up the levels in at this path of preparation, what the reality is, or the emptiness, the lack of intrinsic existence really is, we begin to get a clearer and clearer mental impression. It gets closer and closer and closer and clearer until we're reaching it, until, we're able to actually, have that vision of it and that experience of it. So, and that's why we have like that path of heat, that first, path, is because when we have a fire, right, that heat kind of radiates out and gives a feeling of something. You can feel the heat. And so that's what's happening. We get a feeling for what emptiness is. And as we move up through those stages, that feeling, that impression becomes clearer and clearer. So in any event, so the path of preparation is a better English word for that path.
When they say joining, what exactly is being joined? Because there must be some reason why they chose that word.
I've seen it translated both ways, but I haven't read into what. Sometimes ani pema jor ani sungdwa jor lam ani jor yana dane ani chik tang chik ani ni chik tu ani dekapsu kare chikpo
tate chagor te inada lamngamangama de chimachimalan jorgurwa ani solam chimbo de jolam dama tukate gegor de tele jolam lagumarwa ani tholam ne ne pe omlam la phudi gala nyamjan phugor de tukate gegor de tela jolam ta lagumarwa tatanda jolam la ya de kutso de songi to be ngateam songi ngusum to bala jorwa chigi yanzang jolam de labya de tere.
So mostly what is happening, the reason for the jor, which means to join, the path of joining. So literally the Tibetan word is translated. So the way they call it, in Tibetan, if you were to translate it literally, is the path of joining. And what's happening is it's really talking about the intersection between one path and another path. One path meets up with the other path. And what we're joining with here, what's happening here is we're meeting with or joining with an experience of emptiness. So because the next path is called the path of seeing, and what you're seeing is the reality. You're seeing.
Oh, that's where the veil is completely freed.
And that's, yeah, and Geshe-la had said that earlier. That's when the that's when the veil is gone, and where the emotional obscurations are. So the veil is thinning and thinning and thinning. You know, I like to say it's like you take an eraser and you're like working on the pencil mark, and you erasing it a little, and yeah. So anyway, so you're joining the path of seeing, where you see the veil is lifted. The veil has thinned enough and is gone, and you're joining the path of seeing.
It's like swimming up from the bottom, and as the temperature changes and you get closer, and then finally you break through the surface and take a breath of air.
Yeah, you're joining with the path of seeing. You're joining, and what you're joining with is seeing. The veils have lifted.
Thank you.
So can I ask a question? I have a question, please.
Sure.
So, and this kind of follows along with what this conversation, the way it's been going, but so you have this practice and you follow this path, and the veil, if you're going about it correctly, gradually lifts, and you start to see things as they truly are. And so you reach a point, and this was mentioned earlier, I think, in the question that Laura raised, but you reach a point, I think Geshe-la said, where you experience emptiness. So you're not to nirvana or enlightenment yet, because you have these accumulated karmas. So my question is, so you reach this point of emptiness, but you're still not there. You have this karma, these past deeds. So how do you eliminate? How are the karmas eliminated?
Mm-hmm. Okay, I will ask your question. I'm going to add to it that in Laura's question, you've had an experience of emptiness. You've recognized it directly, but it's not enlightenment because you still have karmas. But also, Geshe-la said you also still have the cognitive obscurations. So there's two veils. There's a level of afflictive or emotional obscurations that got removed with when you saw emptiness, but there's also a layer of cognitive obscuration. So,
Okay.
but I will ask your question.
All right, thank you.
Ani dire ani Geshe-la di dripa dak ki kolore dang le jangya ani Laura gi triwa de la o ngaso di tongni ngonsong di tolnayang ani di ngone ani sangye gi gopang yomare ani di tarpa tobia yomare tanda yang ani le yore ani le di dakore ani le kandres dakore ani dematse ani shedrep yore roa ina di kongi triwa di le ngola sakte le kandres dakore kandres jangore
tate dirwa tanda ngazu nimbu tobji chene le tagre le gorwa so the nimbu tobji gone le gewa chene le ta sayati migwala ngesemchi gewala ani pe pronanche de gewa kon pedini le tagor mado yani lekin namin de minche en le tagor le ta san tengi mado yo mare ta songi ngusum to bala le sarsa yo marde le ngamba tanga thoma me pane le sasha gyote sa tangbuni zimba pardu nyumo bindiba de tagor nyumo bindiba de le sartu sae gyuni yo marda mariba meinsa le sartu sae yo mare chaso nyumo ke yo mare thonom yenjela
yeah de kapsu yang ani le kanyang masaya yang yomare
le kanyang gewe le te sagrwa
re
migwe le
oh yeah
mariba metikola migwe le sae yo mare chaso nyumo ke yo mare indigal migwe le midwa nyumo meti le da nyumo ze betar legdwa 오, 됐지. 되니 다 되니다 개와 세지 제대네. ngaman kyo ngaman jishaga ledale gesemjine sa dumba bardu nyumo bindiba de jangyo sa dumba ringe wandu chana
Kare wangdu chena?
tejin ringe tejin la sangye ringe ring sangye la ngende kin keba chumbo wandu chana oda tini sa dumba ni yepa gupa chuba yorwa yepa gupa chuba te shijitiba pangyare shijitiba pangsona teni sangye nuguare
Anisa nipa sumpa shipa
ngapa
anisa
tuba dumba
partu dene di
nyumon bindiba
nyumongi drepa daya.
oh kyo thoma meban sasha dada nyumon bindiba de taba leta sartu sangye yo marta thoma meban sasha de nyumon da zugil to thonom songi to na te yula yorwa
Ya di nyomon wa ani tone dene le sarpa saya yomare.
sarpa saya yomare
Ding le ngoma ki
ngoma o kyo ngamita le nyumon bindiba de jangyare tatin jangye le la chagorwa le sardu saya mezinza kope le de zoye le la chagore ngaranzo nopche china la nduluna ndu sardu nembe maluna ndu tengi de tengi jina zo dugudwa
la
nopche china
ya
pena kabna chathuna cha nembe maluna chathungi thungi dena chu zo dugura chade o te zone jir kon nembe ge me inza nyum jangya le la chabare igawa sheji chi indgala sa dumba pardo nyumo bin dibajang sa gepa gupani eni be sa sang mage pardo shiji dibajang shiji shiba pardo chepa namgen thobala pardo chepa ti dibadi changare
And so
taking a jum batakarang
lasso. And so the way we purify our past karma, so the karma that is still remaining that we have created in the past, the negative karmas that we are wishing to purify, the way we do this is through through the power of applying an antidote with the 4 powers. So the antidotal 4 powers, or the powers of confession, they're sometimes called, or using the 4 antidotal powers, we employ this method to purify our past negative karmas, along with regret. We have the power of regret and reliance. I think those are all up on Slack. I put those up a little while ago. We confess and apply the 4 powers of the antidote, and this is how we purify our karmas. And at this point, we continue to work on the accumulation of good deeds, of really focusing on positive activity and wholesome deeds, and really being very dedicated and inspired in that area. And so we need to, outside of purifying karmas through these antidotal ways by increasing our positive activities and confessing and purifying our negative activities, or they need to ripen. When our karmas have completely ripened, they're also purified. When a karmic, when we experience the result of something, it is now ripened when we experience the effects. And so we won't be at this point creating any more negative karma, because when you have a direct realization of emptiness, you have undercut the ignorance that formerly caused you to react in ways that would create negative karma. So there's no more negative karmic imprints, imprinting being done. There's no more karmas, negative karmas being accumulated. one doesn't completely stop eliminating accumulation of karma. It's all positive at this point. It's all virtuous. One is completely oriented in virtue. And so one must continue to do those 4 powers and orient themselves in virtuous activity. And so because negative emotions are no longer arising, one doesn't act out of jealousy or desire or hatred. That's all gone. Remember that quote that we had before, which is liberation, which is the exhaustion of karma and the afflictions. So all of the negativity that comes from the proliferation of the negative emotions and the karmas that result are completely eliminated through the realization of emptiness. And so this quote from Nagarjuna is also up there in Facebook and in Slack that tells you about the definition of what is liberation. Liberation is the exhaustion of karma and the afflictions and so forth. And so we need to continue to do those 4 powers and confessions and purify our previous karmas that have been accumulated in previous lifetimes up until now. And so we have to continue to work on that actually through the 7th bhumi. So we are doing this through the 7th bhumi, the Bodhisattva bhumi, which is a stage of like spiritual development. One continues to purify all of those. One is not creating any new negative karmas of afflictive emotions. But one needs to purify the past, and one works on that up until the end of the 7th bhumi. And then in the 8th bhumi, then that obscures the omniscience. So we have the omniscient state of Buddhahood, like a complete enlightenment. So we have the removal of the negative emotions, but then we have the budding or the blossoming into full omniscience. And we're still obscured to that. We still have the veils to that at the 8th bhumi, 9th bhumi, and 10th bhumi, and not until we reach the point of enlightenment do we have we completely removed the veil. So you continue along the Bodhisattva path is the answer there. That is what you do, and then we have the 8th path, 9th path, and 10th path. And then we have the complete omniscience of Buddhahood. So did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So Diane, the removal or the moving along the 8th, 9th, and 10th path until there's full Buddhahood realized. Is that the cognitive obscurations that you were speaking of earlier?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep, exactly. You're abandoning all of the cognitive obscurations at that point. So the meaning, the veil is thinning.
Also, I had a question about the mind-only school where earlier I believe Geshe-la said that there is no external objects and what appears purely in the mind. And that what appears in the mind are karmic seeds that have been planted. And so what is, that's a little, it's a little obscure. I'm trying to parse that out.
Mm-hmm. Maybe if I ask Geshe-la to say more about that.
Yeah, I think that would be useful. Thank you.
Ani Geshe-la, did somebody drupte lugdela pana yul ani chirola ani yomare ingone di semnangla di semdang ani semdang bakchak ani chikpore.
That semgi nangchasam ri la gore. Nangchasam 맞아 멜론난도 스타에는 맞아 주인의 멜론나 셔거라 멜론은 나는 찾으면 맞아 멜론난 가서 주인의 요 말와
아니 the bakchak di pena bakchak how to say min is it bakchak min
바차
bakchak dik mimpa
바차 민발에 중화돼 있어 라고
아니 bakchak mimpala 아니 chungwa de kola di melongi pe di srupodo tichina di bakchak mimpa gi kola chiksoro che
바차 민발에 되었다 가서 그래 맞아 바차 당부 다 바차들이
tampo bakchak sak mar roa bakchak ngoma ki bakchak
교황함에 용구로 왔다는 아주 레가지 가르쳐봐이나 자와대체네 두바 이시가라 빠차 자고다 두바 이시가라 자고래 빠자 고지데 선선바이나 군신도 그라 군신도 디가라 빠자 고지데 군시데 군실 군시가라 빠차자 아니 자만 디지디가라 빠자 셀발테네 빠자든 빠자데 왕게 낭sam지 셔거와
Ani kare chene pana mixelgi du so chikla bakchak chik ani selgere min gere kare chene
다디 레단 대화 용구로와 레단 대화 용구로와
pena kiendang toya
바차 오자 우지데 두바이 이시지 오제데 아니 단다 왕비 시바데스레 오겐
di culture
다디 또 가버리 다디 야션디레
olas
간제 두바이 이시게네 바자 세발 때니 자 군질 때니 또 바자 세발 때니 낭잡네 마다데 야고 말에
laso dene member di bakchak di selpe kapso di melong zugnyen ani sharia nangshin
오 샤르 나진네 주니는 멜로나는 주니는 가서 주니 멜로나 셔거데 난겨데 나와 점르 마다데 멜로나는 요마르와 주니인데
Okay, so we have what are called karmic imprints, which are like pictures that are like representations, like I just want to say like a snapshot. So for example, when we talk about a karmic imprint in the mind, this is something that was recorded or stored before. So something that happened in a previous life, whatever we do, whatever we think, whatever we say, whatever we experience, whatever we see, it's recorded. There's a picture of that, a representation of that recorded in what the mind only call the alaya consciousness, which is called the base of all or the storehouse consciousness. So a picture of that event, a seed containing the picture of that event, a generic image, a representation of that event is stored in the alaya consciousness. It's a repository. Later, when that karmic seed ripens, and it can ripen, it ripens due to karma. I asked Geshe-la how, what do we think of, how should we understand, like at what time it will ripen or what brings it to ripen? He said, this is really dependent on many karmas. It's interdependent with causes and conditions or contributing factors. When it reaches its right karmic time, it's going to ripen. And what that ripening looks like into experience for us is it projects a picture of something. It projects something. And it's like an image in a mirror. So, or reflection. We see something in a mirror. It's a mere appearance in the mirror. It's not really there, but something is projected onto a screen or something is reflected in a mirror. And that's what we see. We see that whatever's on that screen or whatever's on that surface of the mirror. We experience it. We see it. That's what's happening in the mind. The object is not really there, but there is a reflection of that object. And these karmic imprints were planted in the past, and they come to ripen.
This is something interesting that I want to add to what Gaynell is her question there with what you're answering, that Doug could probably maybe enjoy or participate in. There was this war between, I'm not going to say war, but this argument between Stephen Hawking and Alexander Susskind about the loss of information at a black hole. And Alexander Susskind proved that the information is not lost, that it's always stored there at the boundary of a system. And this sounds very similar in regards to consciousness, if we're thinking about consciousness as a kind of substance that we haven't yet been able to qualify yet. Does that make sense, Doug?
Yes. Well, just my opinion is as far as it goes. But personally, I'm always a little wary of these sorts of metaphors because they're good for a while until they're not good anymore. So
Yeah.
it might be helpful as a way to think about it, but it's not the same thing.
I feel like because we're talking about consciousness, the way we're discussing it, it's almost like it's a substance that we haven't yet been able to identify. I mean, we are, from this perspective, speaking beyond the mechanics of the brain when we talk about consciousness.
Consciousness isn't material, though. I don't think.
Well, that's what I'm saying, is that it's like a material that hasn't yet been able to be identified. Like the word material, I guess in this case is a misnomer, but it's something. There's a something. And without a better word, I'm calling it a substance with air quotes. So there's just, when he's saying that these snapshots, like these moments, it's really, it gives a really good picture in my head of what's happening with each of those karmas, because we're talking about every millisecond is a karma. And so all of those snapshots somehow are being stored in some way. So when he's talking about the alaya consciousness, it sounds to me, you know, this is where I would put that, where Doug is saying it's helpful till it's not helpful. I still think it's very helpful for me.
That's the mind-only school's idea about what it is, not necessarily the Saltantrika view of what karmic imprints, how they're stored or whatever.
Right. Because like within the middle way school, they get rid of the concept of alaya consciousness. It's not necessary to have a separate form of consciousness, but I'd be interested to hear what Geshe-la says about how that then, where's the refinement from mind only into middle way in regards to that Gaynell's question.
Well, it's, you know, it's interesting because the way Doug put it is I think very appropriate here, because like every school's assertions are helpful until they're not helpful. And then the next school gets rid of them. And then the next one, you know, they're
but
helpful
not all
to
is
leave.
abandoned.
But not all is abandoned, but some of what they're saying is helpful. And then the next school, you know, they don't use it anymore. So
that's what I'm saying. What part of the mind only is that in that answer is still held over into the middle way?
Mm-hmm.
And what part is abandoned?
Mm-hmm. Okay. Di laso ani Geshe-la di sem sampegi lugla di pana di kunchi nangla bakchasa dang selia dang mempa yanayang di umapa ki drupe lukla ani keba kariore kare ani dogiore kare pangiore
Kepariore. Umape kunjin dugmarwa. Kunjin manda digala paja jasa de karre tuba isi de chadi tuba iki number cheba. Tuba isi gala paja jakor. Te kepar mata jan 바샤 자산도 집어 지잖아. 바샤라 나세기리 가세요래.
아니 샘삼파 낭신 박착삭 다네 박착살이야.
오다 바샤 자시 지데 센잠베 군지가라 자그레즈 라부아레. 우마베 두바 이시가라 자그레즈 라부아레. 테케바레.
디서포도. 아니 디 박착셀 땅 치파레 당.
바샤 셀당 집어 지잖아. 다데서 강가 치파레.
So the difference between mind only and the Madhyamaka view of this whole repository process and then the ripening and kind of how to say, it's almost like, you know, like that appears in the mirror, that appears, that like I guess it would be the ripening, or when one would experience the ripening of that karmic imprint. The only difference is that for the Madhyamakas, they do not accept the like the kunji or the alaya consciousness. They call it the seventh consciousness. There's like this wisdom consciousness, this seventh consciousness. Mental. Yeah, the mental consciousness. And so, right, we have the five consciousness, the regular sense consciousness, then we have the alaya consciousness, and then we have just the mental consciousness. And so they just call it this seventh, this mental consciousness. That's the only difference. It's the sixth. The seventh is the alaya, and so the sixth is meant if you're like when they put them out like that. So it's the sixth. This mental consciousness, but the way that karmic imprints are stored is the same. The way the past like experiences are recorded in that consciousness is the same, and the way that they then ripen and appear before us as ripening, we experience their ripening is the same in Madhyamaka.
Can I have a follow-up question to that on the
Yes.
same path? So this karmic imprint that ripens is like an image in a mirror in our mind. So will we necessarily understand what this image means, this ripening karmic image? Will we understand that, what it means?
You mean connected back to how we planted it?
Well, no, I mean, we see this image ripens and we see it, we visually see it in our mind.
Mm-hmm.
So and the only reason I say that is I see things when I meditate, I see images and I have absolutely no idea what they are or why I see them or what they mean. So if we have a karmic image that's ripening, that we see this mirror image, do we necessarily understand what it means? I mean, if we see something, then we get, you know, a concept of it, but do we necessarily understand what it means?
I will ask your question, and I also want to expand on see it in our mind or experience it in our mind. So, and part of it can be just a kind of an English translation thing. Whatever you look and like whatever you experience, if you meet with someone and have a pleasant experience, that's a karmic ripening of the past. All appearance, everything you see with your eyes, mind only is saying is experiencing in your head, or everything is karmic ripening. So not just meditative experiences, but everything you see and experience. But let me ask Geshe-la to say more about this. Ani bakchak saya di melong ani zunyan sharia nangshin res yenayang ani pena ngatso di sem nangla bakchak mempa ani ngatso namgyun ngatso ngozen chegi yorbe pena ani tanda bakchak ani mempa mempa sare di bakchak ani mempa ki sharwa ani nangshin re ngatso ngozen shaya tukiyana yang mena ngatso kare yana yang kare nyong na yang di ngoma ki bakchak mempa nangshin re samgo yana
tate pacha tangi de shimashi jiri yungura teta pacha de tangi shimashi jiri yungure tai mancheji kanala nangpa ina le lagore injun che go yonga me pacha selere manda.
So it really so some of this is semantics. Whether we experience, so when we're experiencing something, there are some people that just say, oh, it's my karma. Let's say you get in a car accident or you lose your wallet, somebody, whatever experience, whatever happens, walking down the street and you're seeing like a beautiful day, or walking down the street or seeing a rainy day. There's some people will just say, oh, it's my karma. It's my karma to be experienced in this. It's my karma to have lost my wallet. But that's a way to put it. But what really is happening is my karma is ripening right now for me to see that I've lost my wallet. My karma is ripening right now that my car got hit. My karma is, my karmic imprint is ripening so that I see a sunny day. That's what's really happening. But some people just say, oh, it's my karma to be experiencing this. What's really happening is these are all ripenings of karmic imprints that were previously like planted in the mental consciousness or alaya consciousness.
So Diane, does this mean that we don't have free will?
Ani dindre yana ani ngatso di rangwang kanyang ani yomare be ngatso la rangwang kanyang me panangshin re.
Ta maripe tennon de dior mada maripe la rawan thobe ina tini rawan yor de mada khapure.
Rawan topia sana.
Rawan thob sidi gala le tanda paja jaya dan ta be le dan tene ke chi gorwa. Jaza te yoya de maripe wangi gorwa. Jaza ta mige le da mige wa se de mige paja jaya te so mi maripe wangi gorwa. Maripa yon de gala maripa yon la maripa me azola fongi to bestawa mada mido. Fongi to bestawa musum de rang yule kenna mari bechen netole ta rawan tin thobere rawan thamje dewa inje de dembati ni re rawan thamje dewa in jawan thamje dungal in su sungu do ando na la rawan kadi ragre mari pala pe chik mari pele ne pe rawan ji thobe na tin rawan re rawan thamje dewa in jawan thamje dungal in se de ta rawan de la ku yu mangpu yor wa tanda le jare na mari belle le jana rawan se de mari pali thasing tu bi nan ta rawan ngoni thobere jidan rawan se de tangi kabakasal ju jar cho ro jirwa tanda le dang ta pa cha dang tende kan la ke du gala ngone ngaso mari bagala zugu wa cha gdo
Ani ngoma ngaso penalty chusala de kola ani rolling ani cheba yu ani pena rangwan sana tanda nga ja ani cha ri pena
kaba jer
ya nga ani ja pe jimpo ani tongdo yu Ani nga dela rangwang yana.
스스로 오늘 자 진보통도에나 스스로 유제 차상제나 스스로 라마로 왔다. 야니 녀 저저라 아메리카 텔레기안 라마 전부도 왔다 그때라. 단다데 아차 땅 레간 레용데가라 머리 빨리 마 타싱 못음나 라마 맵존 지레다. 지단은 라마다 까바 저저라지레.
So when we talk about free will, as long as we still have any ignorance, as long as we still have we're still in a state of fundamental not knowing, meaning we haven't seen, we haven't experienced that which completely removes ignorance, which is emptiness, we will still be in a state that keeps us from having free will. We will still actually be in a dependent situation. When we see emptiness, when we have the direct realization, that which completely eliminates us from being in a state of not knowing, then we will have attained independence or free will. And there's this saying in the sutras that says that with free will or independence, then there is happiness. But as long as we are other dependent, then we will suffer. There will be unhappiness and suffering. And so what we really have to do if we want to attain real free will, to attain the state of having free will, then we need to become completely independent and completely cut away from the state of not knowing, the state of ignorance. And until we do that, we will still be under the sway of having karmas that we will still be in this way of having negative karmas and being under influenced, under the sway of influence. We have to, if we really want to have freedom over the karmas that we create, we have to absolutely sever the string of ignorance. That's what we need to do to have free will. So I asked Geshe-la, well, until we reach that point, do we have free will, let's say, to go make, like, let's say we want to make a nice cup of delicious tea. Do we have free will to do that? And he said, that's also not entirely certain. It's really not certain. We may think we want to go have like a delicious cup of tea, and maybe in that moment, at that day, at that time, in that circumstance, we'll be able, you know, to be in a place where we can go buy a delicious tea and have the water and have the, you know, the heat that we want to boil the water, maybe, but that's also very, very subject to change, and that's not under our control.
So how do you have the first moment of free will in a decision in order to move your mind towards Dharma? So for example, if I'm subject to, you know, a completely dependent will, then what instigates that mind to move towards Dharma in the first place? In other words, if I have a choice before me to either do something virtuous or non-virtuous, if I have a dependent will, what moves me towards one or the other? Is there absolutely no free choice?
Lasso dne dne pena ngala damkare tanda o tamakten tupkiore ani dompadong tupkiore nga damka chegore dne kechik tampo ani dangpa kechik tampo ani di nupa kare ani kare ore pana gewe gichok ani mi gewe gichok ani di damka kechik tangpo kane jungiore, di kareyore, di rangwang yore, jenwang yore, di
Kandese.
pena tanda nga dutso yer ta chilola tamaten ani tupki yore di damka chik yamena ani pena chusham nangla ani dompa dong yore. Yena kechik damka chegore. Damka chegore. Ani dene nga dene kechik tambo damka chea gi kechik tampo dela gi nupa kariyore di rangwang sigiyona tanda tamaten.
Ati
Damka chegi.
Rawang
Nga rangwang yona
Rawang yudi ta damka che yoro. Rawang mena damka che yumidoa. Rawang yo insan damka che doa. Tandi tagi te leegi tagi ngese de Rawang tamje dewa in Jawang tamje dungali zede Jawang siade mari balanzugu ne. Mari pe tseno to kati yo insan ta yona ta tila ta dungal gi yu baji mata to biya yo mare lab gore. Jawang siduala mari balan Jawang tamje dungal in siduala mari pe Jawang du sonde. Ngone ko chambudwa. Mari pe Jawang du machana ta su rang zorijwa.
Dine samsam ngatsola rangwang yer. Damka yona samsam yona di yang gyor chok chokre.
Redata tagite to mari balas mi guare. Tanda rawang Jawang se tanda kabgi rawang da Jawang da domba no yada tamate ta susu panang judo la rale. So ngone chik ekevi chola kachoguina domba no yada kechere. Ta susu enjoy che tama tuya de shibuji suso nen naza guguena tama tuna digorte ke mara.
So when we talk about having free will or not free will, we're really talking at a very kind of a like the level when
Mardan chomden degen zugutsuksa de jewang se den zugutsuksa de mari balan zugutsune mari pe temo chinchela ta ramang yo mares zungal baji mado dewa yo mares te sungorta ten zugutsuksa de chomden din dilsa de nyomono kyondo ta dirgorwa nyomono mari bikengi ngorwa.
So whether we have free will or not, or what we call have independence, or we don't have independence, the Buddha really pointed directly towards an underlying factor that is really the deciding factor, and that comes down to whether one is consumed by ignorance. As long as one has the overarching component or influence of ignorance, then one doesn't have free will, because under the state of ignorance, one is driven to emotional reaction. And when one is in the state of emotional reaction, one is no longer independent. One has lost their independence. One loses their independence to emotional reaction based on ignorance. And so when one has removed ignorance or is in a state removed from ignorance, then one has dependent choice. One has or independent choice. One has independence. So, for example, I made the example of what is driving that first moment when we make a choice between doing something virtuous and non-virtuous. I gave the example of I have the choice right now. I can go outside and smoke cigarettes, or I can go up to the altar and do some prayers. And when I make that first, like when I choose what to do, what drives that? And Geshe-la said, he brought it down to something, very, very core. If you have a choice, then you have independence. You're in a state of being able to have that free will. when you're in, it is when you, so in that moment, if you have a choice, you have free will. And what the Buddha said about free will or dependence or independence is we cannot have independence as long as we have ignorance, because as long as we have ignorance, we can fall sway to influencing factors that we lose all control. We're no longer in control. And so if we have a choice, then we have independence. If we're not under the sway of ignorance at the time.
So you're saying at the moment a choice can be made. If we're not under the sway of ignorance, we do have a type of free decision that I can, as long as I'm not under some kind of emotional duress, I can make that choice between sitting down and doing a sadhana practice or going and having a slice of cheesecake.
And the trick is going to be knowing when you're being ignorant or not. That's going to be the hard part.
Right, exactly. But that choice does exist, and it is, we're not completely dependent. There is that sliver of a decision to make, that it's not 100% determinalism we're talking about.
And I'll try to bring in, yes, I hear what you're saying and I hear what Laura's saying. I'll try to bring that into the best I can.
Rawang sedala pe kwa pe til pe kwa mangpurwa ta ngaran so tanang yopuda pombu chbayina yopuda pombu ni purula rawang yeme ji yarwa pombu lele yana yopuda la rawang che yore yopu tembu yana yopula rawang tasam yongo marwa tende rawang ji yore yalkha be ni chene wala yana rawang yongo marde rawang jirwa tanda ngas nang pe she rawang se ade mari pe chene o yo yana tan dam ka ta mi do mari pe ole yo chinjela damga yana suzo rawang jirwa.
Okay, this is Portuguese la. Ani di yang re chikre. Ani ngaso di merikpegi gyu mache na yang pena tong ni ngonson di mato na yang. Sam ani nyomong mepe tonge di yang damka yerpe kapsu marikpe pene nyomyong shukchempo di nyomyong shukchempo.
Nyamnyong zana maripala kyundu ta thungenji la maripala pang na yang maripe kyundu ta thui na maripe na phajar tosu rawang tosu length gorda maripala ngogor tang thu ya yore ta ngogor ta ta kapchi raya thapji yore.
Really, yana lor ge tu wadi dingone otanda marakpa ani ge wongi ani mechena ani nyomnyong mepetone ngone chene di culture nge ngarangla gokor ani chepanangchen yang sigere
당문에 가서 머리 박을는데는 수수성 고걸 소리 좋아. 누가 대원지 멜로시 진짜 숨도.
이네 참참 네 삼발라 탄다 나 냠냠메 아니 마렉베기 왕두 차나 책임에 이네 딩고네 나 나랑라 아니 고코르 당연 낭신 ngo네 펠처 nge kunlong ani yabo yomare kensonge so there's different kinds of free will, Geshe-la said. So let's leave apart the kind of free will when we talk about enslavement or being, an underling of someone who orders us to do something, and because we're under their command, we need to do it, or we don't have freedom under a particular nation to do something. Let's leave that aside. That's a separate issue. But when Buddhism talks about having free will or dependence, the way they really put this is to have independence. really what it all comes down to is, are you still subject to like the sway of your emotions, to reacting to something in an emotional way? Are you really, can something still influence you like that? Can you be influenced by your thoughts and feelings? Or are you completely above all that and beyond all that? Do you recognize that part of your like psychology or psyche and recognize it and see it as an impediment and a fault and something that have already identified and are looking and separate from, and know that in this moment, I am not influenced by any of that. I really am acting independently outside of my thoughts and feelings and emotions. If you are really, really, even though you haven't recognized emptiness yet and really cut the stream of ignorance entirely, even if you haven't had that realization, you can have moments where you are free and independent. And like Mark had said, you have that sliver of opportunity, that window of opportunity where you really are acting independently outside of any of that. And Geshe-la said that's possible. And again, if you have a choice, if you are in the point of real choice, then, or in that place, you do have choices and independence.
Yeah, dog. Oh, choose to the karma nishu chagdo. Choose jugara, choose romajo.
Geshe-la said we've gone, gosh, we're getting almost to be an hour over. It's like 6:20 or so. So yeah, we went way over.
Yeah, that mare yan mambutan chena.
Are you all tired?
Tired and happy.
Happy and tired total contradiction marebe. Marebe.
He said, aren't those two contradictory?
No.
Yeah. Yeah, then watch it out.
So then let's dedicate.
Chancho semcho rimboche, maje pana kingurche, kyawa nyamba mepayam, kondo pewaras. Kari rave, kurve shunga. Pendan dewa malin jungene, cherezemon tenzin kyat. Jabe site porto singurchi, jambal pawe chitar kembatan, kondo zampo teyan tijin. Teta kunjeji zo dalo chir gewandi to, tamche rabto mo, tusung shibi kyawa tamche ki, mo kanlo choto mo. Bodhichitta,
the excellent and precious mind, where it is unborn, may it arise. Where it is born, may it not decline, but ever increase higher and higher. And the land encircled by snow white mountains, the source of all happiness and benefit, flows in your person, Chenrezig, Tenzin Gyatso, remain until samsara ends. Just as the Bodhisattva Manjushri attained omniscience and Samantabhadra too, so now I dedicate these merits to train and follow in their footsteps. As all the victorious Buddhas of the past, present, and future praise dedication as supreme, so now I too dedicate these sources of my merit for all beings to perfect good actions.
Thank you. That's among also depth lot and depth and yeah.
So next week, or next time, we will get into the book. We'll get into the debate, and we'll get back to the text.
Thank you, Geshe-la. Thank you,
Okay,
Diane.
thank you.
Thank you.
Take care, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you, Laura.
See you all. Take care.
Thank you.